All right, well, good morning, everyone. It's my turn. Thankfully, last week, Ethan said that he would be in the batter's box, if you will. I don't know if that's that bad, but it is quite difficult. I really appreciate Gary in the Bible studies for us, because even trying to put together a lesson, which I had several ideas, and then I don't know how it is for everybody else, but again, how it comes from me, it usually comes like a freight train. I just kind of was, and then literally in 5 minutes, wham, that's how it comes to me. And I just write everything down, and there it was. And I'm trying to get that from here into here is where the biggest bunch of problems tend to come in for me. Again, Ethan and most of us say, this is not my profession. My profession is to be an engineer, and we've been going through upgrades, and so thus I thanked Ethan last week. He took the position because we were doing ones and ran into troubles as usual. The upgrades, as we always say, are the oxymoron of the industry. So I brought for us here this morning, hopefully my laptop will start going. Yeah, there we go. The timings are all off too. I like to use, I don't know if anybody knows, but anyway, as an engineer, I use a lot of stuff called VM products, which are virtual machines. So at home, I don't really have a machine per se. I have about 20 machines that I use, believe it or not. Yes, it is 20 machines. Each one does a different function, and I can get in and dive in, and I know what each one does. So oftentimes I go back to, and this is my slowest input. This thing doesn't have any right drivers, so I don't see anything here. So I may be doing a lot of this to make sure. And I try to use open products so that we're not into the Microsoft dollar system. I don't see why anybody should spend $400 for Office. And it's an open source version that works quite well. Well enough anyway. I just still mastered the timing, so I don't use it all the time. But anyway, so here we are. So this morning's my lesson is going to be on captivity. And as it was I think quite a few weeks ago, my wife and I watched a movie on about it, and I've seen movies growing up on the Israelites' captivity and their, fighting out of Egypt, and it's always good, isn't it? It's like at the end, you just always are like, yeah, they just not read it. I mean, literally, it's not that long and that much of reading. It's like I don't know. It's like tore pages out, crumpled them up, said, okay, well, this sort of looks right. I don't know. And it just got even worse. The one we had watched was one of the newer versions of it, and it was pitiful. It's just so disgusting what they try to do. They tried to make it seem that essentially Moses was delusional, and he's just seeing things, and these things don't happen. And of course, that's what scientists often want us to believe. They often want us to believe that these plagues and the things that we'll see come up never really happened, and that they were all just easily explained away, and they're all just this. But yet now they are finding that actually in the places and all throughout those lands that they are finding biblical evidence of these things actually occurring. Not necessarily all of them, but some of the things that they were actually written down and stuff. So, but yet they want to take that one little bit. Well, this one wasn't shown up, so the frogs weren't shown up as being biblical evidence. So let's just, or as being scientific evidence written somewhere. So let's just toss the whole thing out. And it's just, I think they have a lot more to keep going to try and disprove anything there. The Bible simply disproves it, and the story makes sense from beginning to end. So again, as we get into it, we think about the captivity of the Israelites, and we see that ultimately how God then was teaching them the true lesson of repentance, to give up sin and idol worship and lead them away from his God-given principles. So these are the things that then essentially from them being in captivity so long, it seems that they just couldn't let that go. No matter what, it seems that thread seems to have stuck with them all throughout their generations and stuff. More so than the wanting to telling of who God is and what he actually did for them, and this ultimate thing, which it ultimately does. And again, most movies open up and start going through the characters and things. So, again, they just fail in that accuracy point to really show what was going on. And that it eventually did take the 10 plagues and disasters for Pharaoh to finally then let the Israelites go. So the first one we want to get is the God remembering essentially his promise to the Israelites in Exodus 2. And we'll be quite a bit in Exodus 2. There will be some New Testament stuff, but obviously the big ones are going to be here in Exodus. So Exodus 2, 23 through 25. And it came to pass in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up to God by reason of Israel's side. No, sorry, by reason of the bondage. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abram and with Isaac and Jacob, and he saw the children of Israel and took knowledge of them. So again, that's just really framing up for what was going on. They were in such dire straits and positions, and being essentially tasked hard, so that God remembers and his promise and what he's going to essentially lay out all before them. So then God speaks to Moses and sends him to Pharaoh here. And that's in Exodus 3:7-9. And so Jehovah said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people that are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters. For I know their sorrows, and have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptian, and to bring them up out of the land into a good land, large, flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite. And behold, now the cry of the children of Israel is come to me. Moreover, I've seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppress them. So that's the biggest thing to get out of it, is that, God essentially there in Exodus knows and has seen everything that's been going on. So he has not been that way, but his plan was not ready yet. It is getting close to getting put into action. So then he essentially, in the whole story, again, we can't go through the entire story in one lesson. Fantastic speaker. He's guilty charged here. And so he says, okay, well, then we'll send Aaron along with you. And well, what if they don't leave me? So then God says, well, we're going to take care of that. So now Moses, essentially, Pharaoh's going to answer Moses and Aaron in Exodus 5. So that's the next one to read. Exodus 5, verses 1 and 2. So afterwards, Moses and Aaron and said to Pharaoh, thus says Jehovah God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, who is Jehovah, that I should hear to his voice to let Israel go? I do not know Jehovah, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. So there we go. There's our biggest thing as to why Pharaoh is who he thinks he is. And don't let us forget that at this time, the Egyptians are the supreme power in the entire world. So there they are sitting there. And again, it's sort of like our big cheese and anybody else. And we always like to make fun of King John Yu, the little dictators of lands. But in their own mind, they're like, I'm the top cheese. Why should I listen to anybody who comes to me to say, this is what you're demanding of me? No, what I say goes, and it's continued to go. So why should it? A lot of this is, God hardening Pharaoh's heart, but I don't think it really would be an any stretch to not know that this would have been already in his character to essentially have these things. So then we're going to get into the 10 plagues. How did that change? Probably interesting. So there you go, doing one thing. So here's our 10 that we'll read through them. Again, I did the shortened versions. It's always good to go through part of our Bible reading and things and read the entire story. So these will be, for time's sake, versions. So the first plague was water turned into blood in Exodus 7:19. And the Lord spake unto Moses and said, say to Aaron, take thy rod and stretch it out over the hand of the waters of the Egypt, and upon the streams, upon the rivers, upon the ponds, and all the pools of water, that they may become blood, and that they may become blood, and that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in the vessels of wood and in the vessels of stone. So it's interesting. Some have written that the first three were possibly even afflicted, as we don't really have an account later on after the first three, that they're just not affecting the Israelites. But in this part, we cannot really see it. This is saying all throughout the land. So it does seem to indicate that even they were afflicted by these first three. And then, so the blood then was in everything. So it wasn't in any pot of water. It wasn't any, like my little water jug. It would have been in every little pot of water. And again, how is it going to happen? They always like to say, oh, it was this, it was, again, like the red algae and stuff, and it's been affecting in the seas and big giant pools, the algae dying off, and it gives off the chemical, and essentially it turns the water red. Well, how's that going to happen if it's in your jug that you drew out a day ago? Because many people live far away from it, so they would go and have a water day, and they would pull the water out. So how's it going to affect pots of water that have been sitting in your own home, or like in your cistern, that are not connected to any other water system, other than by God said it's going to happen, and this is what happened. So let's also read then the frogs. Exodus 8, 2 through 4. Exodus 8, 2 through 4 reads, "And if they refuse, let them go, and behold, I will smite all the borders with frogs, and the river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into your house, and all your bedchamber, and upon your bed, and into the house of your servants, and upon the people, and into your ovens, and into your kneading troughs." So again, it's we're reading here that the frogs were essentially everywhere. And the frogs shall come up on you and upon your people and upon all your servants. So it's pretty much everywhere you turn, even in your oven, there's your frogs. So essentially they're going to essentially be all over everything. So they're just not at certain places. It's not like something you're going to be able to get away from. It's going to be in your bed and things like that. So it's everywhere. And then the gnats, lice and fleas. Essentially, we read about it in mine, reading from the Standard King James. That really it says lice, but it can be translated as gnats or fleas. I mean, essentially, like a small biting animal type, or insect, we should say. So Exodus 8:16 reads, "And the Lord said unto Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your rod and smite the dust of the land, that it may become lice, and throughout all the land of Egypt." So again, this is one here that was throughout all the land of Egypt. So kind of denoting that. And the other ones, if you really look deeper into them, it does seem, definitely says that it did not affect the territory of Goshen, where the Israelites are. So I think this is also to kind of maybe spark the Israelites into thinking like, wow, there is something bigger than us going on. And then we move into the flies from Exodus 8:21. "Else, if thou wilt not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies upon you and upon your servants and upon the people, and they will go into the houses, and the houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also on the ground wherever they are." So, again, this is not just a small amount of flies, some places that you might be accustomed to, or a small amount that we put up the sticky tapes or a fly bag or something. This is not an amount that's going to go away with that. Then the next one, as he goes into, is livestock disease from Exodus 9. Exodus 9:3. "Behold, the hand of the Lord, which is upon the cattle, which is in the field, upon the horses, asses, upon the camels, upon the oxen, the sheep, there shall be many a grievous moran." And so there we read essentially that the livestock, essentially, and it didn't really matter what kind of livestock was going to be diseased. So it seems to be affecting livestock. Then we move into the boils in Exodus 9:8 and 9. "And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take the handful of ashes of the furnace, and let Moses sprinkle them towards heaven in the sight of Pharaoh. It shall become small dust in all the land, and shall be a boil breaking forth upon the veins upon a man and upon a beast, and throughout all the land of Egypt." So there we go again, that the boils will affect them and affect everybody there. They're going to essentially have these the painful boils upon themselves. And he's doing it upon his sight, so it's the connection between what he's doing and that, and yet it's still Pharaoh does not listen and understand what's going on, even though he's doing this right in front of his presence, and this is essentially what happens. So talk about a hard-headed person. I think, you know what I mean? It's kind of one of those things. Before this, we have the magicians trying to kind of keep pace with the things. And here we begin to see that it's not. It's affecting. It's getting serious. These are things. I mean, if you think about it, we've essentially gone from not being able to have water, not being able to have food, not being able to do anything throughout, your times of going on. That lamb or that, the livelihood, if you're a farmer and things, is being affected. And now you're personally being affected based upon the thing. And then we'll see here in plague 7 is the thunder, hail, and brimstone from Exodus 9 and 18. That essentially anything that was around. So if you were then, grapes or fig farmer, that essentially it's going to come and you're going to be decimated that way. So 9:18 reads, Behold, tomorrow about this time I'll cause it to rain a very grievous hail, such as not been seen in Egypt since the fountain thereof even until now. Again, that's the thing where it's going to hail to the point of where it's breaking down the trees, causing them to crack. And then we'll see now that the locusts then were sent to essentially vacuum up any of the other stuff that you thought, like, hey, maybe I can still salvage this tree or salvage my vineyard or something. Now the locusts come in Exodus 10:4-5, which reads, Else if thou refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring the locusts into your coast, and they shall cover the face of the earth, that one cannot be able to see all the earth, and they shall eat the residue, that which is escaped, which is the remnant, unto you from the hail, and shall eat every tree which grows for you out of the field. So again, we had watched in some of the movies, and some of the trees seem to mysteriously still be there. Even after the locust came through. And here it says everything that's left is going to do. I had read a statistic that basically 1 ton of locusts can eat as much as 2,500 people in a day. Think about that, and that's just 1 ton. And we're talking about locusts all over covering their entire coast. That's way more than 1 ton. So it was complete and utter decimation of anything green. Well, it's funny when we talk to Peter, and Peter has emailed us back and forth, and he's just like, what's with all the green? He just doesn't quite get it. It's like in Zimbabwe and places, there's just not that. In us, we just take it for granted. Everything's bringing forth into green. Of course, we went from white to green. We've seen the change from white to green, the brown, the mud season, and back to green. But imagine that. Imagine taking a picture of all of what you have around you that's all that green. Now, in cities, we kind of lose perspective of that. But really, it doesn't take too far. Even in the city, you drive through Central Park. There's a ton of green, a ton of beautiful trees and stuff. Imagine them all just sawn into nothing. And essentially what would happen when the plague of locusts. And then in the darkness, which is very interesting. Again, I don't know how scientists would even try to explain away this tending to happen only into their area. And for 3 days to the point where they can't see each other. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And that's in Exodus 10 again, 21 and 22, which reads, And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch out your hand towards heaven, that there may be darkness all over the land of Egypt, and even darkness which may be felt. And Moses stretched forth his hand towards heaven, and there was a thick darkness in all the land of Egypt for 3 days. So there we go. We have the darkness covering the land for 3 days, and I don't understand why it wouldn't be totally. I mean, if that's anybody else, the point of where it's thick, that to the point where you can't really see each other and things, and for 3 days straight, your mind would begin. Essentially, that's one of the best and worst forms of tortures for people, if you want to think about to break them, is you make them lose all track of time. When you don't have track of time. I know one time when I was younger, I got sick. I was so tired that I went to bed, and I was convinced I got up. It was like towards 7. I thought it was late, and it was at nighttime. And it just totally unwound me to the point of like, wow, it just took me a good 10, 15 minutes to finally figure out, wait, what time is it? It doesn't make sense to you. And imagine 3 days of that to the point where you can't see. Then finally we got into his last and final one, which essentially broke Pharaoh, at least for the temporarily part. He later chased them throughout, but that was the death of the firstborn. And this is the particularly one we're going to zero in on for more than one reason. So Exodus 11, verses 4 and 5. And Moses said, Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out to the midst of Egypt, and all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that sits upon the throne, even to the firstborn of the maidservant that is behind the mill, and all the firstborn of the beasts. So this is, again, the ultimate total desolation. Now, what's interesting about it, they're just going to have by happenstance, many is going to try and believe that this is just why they were let go, with just many of these things, with just a series of events, of things just happened. The river turned to blood, made the frogs die, which, and then flies come in and that thing. And it's like God had a plan for all these things all throughout, and it's being shown as to why it was. So God wanted to make them an example in what happened to the Egyptians to the whole world. So then when they say, okay, well, so why the Israelites? Well, that's found in Exodus 9, if we back up, 9, 15, and 16. Which says, For now I have put forth my hand, and smitten thee all the people with pestilence, and thou hast been cut off from all the earth, But very indeed, for this cause I have made thee to stand, to show thee my power, that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. So right there, God explains it to us why he's doing it to them and why he's showing it. He wants them to be an example. And that's why he's essentially using them, the superpower of their time, as an example for the rest of the ones that were going to be all around it, and for the Israelites for all time. So that's the intro as to why Israel is. Because God remembered the promise, the answer Pharaoh was taught, who is God that I should obey Israel and let them go, and to show the world the superpower of the time, that they are going to be an example throughout all time. And essentially we do. We think about it for all time. So we see the Israelites leaving captivity by the power of God then from Egypt, the establishment of the Passover and the observance of it for their generation. This is important and defining step to show the recognition of what God has done for them up to this point, for them as a people. So what did it require? What does it require for us? It requires an active participation, in the necessary steps to be let go from captivity. It wasn't something that they were going to do just on their, from God's own promise. It required them. It was, but they had to grab hold of it, and they had to understand what it was and do what it said it was. Because if they didn't do it, then they were going to be held accountable, and they were going to lose their firstborn. So I think they were definitely paying attention at that point, and exactly to the letter and what they had to do. And many tend to think that it's just, oh, we just do this, we just do that. There were very many steps laid out as to what you had to do, and they had to do it in order to let go. So doesn't it sound familiar for us today? I want to go a little bit further now over into Exodus 12, 37 through 42, which is then essentially the reading of them on their way out. Exodus 12, 37 to 42 reads, And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men besides children. And a mixed multitude went up also with them, flocks, herds, and very many cattle. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough which were brought forth out of Egypt, for it wasn't leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and did not tarry, neither had they prepared for themselves any victual. Now the time that the children of Israel dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of 430 years, even as the selfsame day it came to pass, that all the hosts of Jehovah went out of the land of Egypt. It is a night to be observed unto Jehovah for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. That is the night of Jehovah, much to be observed of all the children of Israel throughout their generations. There it is. Can you imagine 430 years? We haven't even been a country that long, and they were in captivity for that long. And it's pretty interesting. And again, it's to be observed for all the children of Israel throughout their generations. And isn't that essentially where they started going, wrong right from the get-go? Started to stop forgetting to observe the things that God had said. But the word had done its effectiveness there, at least the message had, and later generations, other nations at the time that knew of what God had done. I just want to read us a quick story from Joshua 2:9 through 11, which is the story of Rahab hiding the two spies for knowing what God had then done to the Israelites. So there we go. Moses now has died essentially at this point to send the spies out into the land. And she says to him, again, Joshua 2:9 through 11 says, And she said to the men, I know that what Jehovah has given you the land, and the fear is that fear of you is fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land will melt away before you. For we have heard how Jehovah dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, whether that you did unto the two kings of the Amorites that were beyond the Jordan, and of Sinon and of God, and utterly destroyed. And as soon as we had heard it, our hearts did melt. Neither did there remain any more spirit in any man because of you. For Jehovah your God, he is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. So there we go. There's the reasons why, and now it had carried through, and the message was quite effective to the point that she understood exactly what was going on. And it's interesting as we had our home Bible study, it had come up that essentially there were requirements, essentially once they'd come back, what they would do, with the sash cord, that she had to follow specific things. They had to be in the house and not to leave the house. So it wasn't like this thing of they were just going to miraculously say the thing. Now they were coming through and they weren't taking names, but they said it will be on our heads if our men break down your door and essentially do it and disregard what we've told you as a sign, so we know to pass over your house. So it's kind of interesting as the same kind of manner is essentially what? The last of the deaths of the firstborn, or essentially was a sign put upon the house, a seal put upon the house, so that when the men came through, they weren't. Now, again, it kind of gets into in the death of the firstborn, some have had it, oh, it was a gas, it was this, it was that. It's just God came through. However he accomplished that, whether it was through an angel of the Lord, what he handpicked and what was going through, and he passed over the Israelites' homes, knowing that that's what it was. And again, here in the story of Joshua, just how that they, when it came to ransack the city, that there was a sign set and sealed. So then our later, moving on, we have our Israelites then returning to idol worship and not following God. In the Syrian captivity or exile around 740 BC. And this is found in 1 Chronicles 5, 25 and 26. So it's about 740 BC. It's a period of Jewish history during which the number of Jews of the ancient kingdom of Israel then were captive in Assyria. And the northern kingdom then was conquered by the Neo-Assyrian monarchs Tiglath-Pileser Phul and Shalmaneser V. And then later the Assyrian rulers of Sargon II and his son and successor, Sennacherib. And these were responsible for finishing the 25-year demise of Israel's northern 10-tribe kingdom. Though they did not overtake the southern kingdom, later Jerusalem was besieged but not taken. The tribes of Assyria later became known as the 10 lost tribes. So again, 1 Chronicles 5, 25, 26. And they trespassed against God of their fathers and played the harlot after the gods of the peoples of the land, in whom God destroyed before them. And God of Israel stirred up the spirit of the people of the land, the spirit of Phul, the king of Assyria, and the spirit of Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria. And he carried them away, even as the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and brought them to Halah, Habor, Hara, and to the river of Gozan unto this day. So there we go. He stirred them up to the point of what he was going to use them to essentially break them down and essentially carry them off into captivity, help frame them. I want to read 2 Chronicles 30, verse 1, and we'll get verses 5 and 6. And this is essentially then, now Hezekiah here essentially sending the thing out to remember to keep the Passover and sending out the letter so that they will essentially do so and be reminded of who God is and what he did for them. And Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Judah and wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, and that they should come over to the house of Jehovah at Jerusalem to keep the Passover unto Jehovah, the God of Israel. And verses 5 and 6. So they established a decree to make a proclaim throughout all Israel, from Beersheba even to Dan, that they should come to keep the Passover unto Jehovah, the God of Israel, at Jerusalem. For they had not kept it in great numbers, in such sort as it was written. So the post went with letters from the king and his princes throughout all of Israel and Judah, and according to the commandment of the king, saying, Ye children of Israel, turn again to Jehovah, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, that you may return the remnant that escaped you out of the hand of the kings of Assyria. So there's the thing that it went back over. They had not been doing what they were told to have been doing, and so they're beginning to realize the error of their ways. And let's read 2 Chronicles 30, verse 1. Essentially here, that now they essentially are formed back. Now when all this was finished, and all Israel was present, and went out unto the cities of Judah, and brake into pieces the pillars, and hewed down the Asherim, and broke down the high places, and the altars out of all of Judah, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh, and they were destroyed them all. Then all the children of Israel returned, every man to his possession, into their own cities. So again, it's kind of their pathway of they wandered, they kind of realized the errors, they broke down everything, broke down all the high places, but then, as the Israelites do, they tend to forget what God had essentially done for them. So we see the pattern, though, forming, following other nations in their false worship. Did they bring these false worships and lusts with them from Egypt? I think it was just kind of within them, and it just leads them to being taken away captive, being broken spiritually, and eventually turned back to God. Again, this pattern now will be repeated again in the Babylonian captivity or exile, which is the period in which the number of Jews from the ancient kingdom of Judah were captives in Babylonia. And there was the three exportations, about 597, 587, and 582. And all these captivities and repentance by the Israel ultimately define their history and their culture. And it could have been a different story had they not, unwilling or willingly chosen to turn their backs on God. So again, they had it within their own might. They had it all written down. They had the priesthood, and yet they all kind of failed in their own duties. It's back to God. So now I want to turn our captivities to modern times. Say, okay, well, there's nothing new under the sun. You know, it kind of is. There's captivities in modern times. While it's not necessarily what the exactly what happened to the Israelites, it is kind of those things that keep us held captive. And these are the things it often does. And I have 4 up here for us to kind of do. There could be some others, but I came up with these 4 that I wanted to kind of look at, which is captivity to sin. 1 John 3, verses 4 through 10. Again, we're going to look at some of the vices that kind of hold people up. Everyone that does sin does also lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness. And you know that he was manifested to take away his sins, and in him is no sin. Whoever abides in him sins not. Whoever sins has not seen him, neither does know him. My little children, let no man lead you astray. He that does righteousness is righteous, even as he is righteous. But he that does sin is of the devil. For the devil's sins become from the beginning. To this end was the Son of Man manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. Whosoever is begotten of God doeth no sin, because his seed abides in him, and he cannot sin, because he was begotten of God. In this the children of God are manifest, and the children of the devil. Whoever does not righteousness is not of God, and neither he that loves not his brother. So again, there's the John essentially writing to us that doing sin is also doing lawlessness, essentially not following what God's going to have for it, and God's not going to be a part of you essentially if you continue in sin. So it's one of our big things, being essentially held captive by it. Let's go over to what Paul said in Romans 7, 20 through 25. But if I would that I do, it is no more than I do, but sin which dwells in me. I find then the law that to me which do good, evil is present. For I delight in the law of God after the inward man. But I see a different law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members. Wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me out of the body of this death? I thank God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then I myself, with the mind indeed, serve the law of God, but with the flesh, the law of sin. So there's Paul's, I think it's one of the most classic examples of kind of the inward strife about what goes on in a man's mind, knowing that what you're doing is wrong, and then recognizing it, and he recognizes it here, and he's saying, I see the warring essentially going on in my members there. But did we catch the statement, which was that he was being held essentially captive by it? So again, I kind of thought of being held captive. Moving on to the sin, essentially, could possibly be of money. I want to read James 4, 13 through 17. I think this one's very familiar for some. Come now, ye that say today or tomorrow we will go into this city and spend a year there and trade, get gain. Whereas you do not know that shall be on the morrow. What is your life? For you are a vapor, and appear for a little while, then vanishes away. For you ought to say, if the Lord wills, that we shall both live to do this or to do that. And now you glory in your vauntings, and as such glorying is evil. To him, therefore, that knows to do good and does it not, to him it is sin. So essentially, it's not necessarily so much of them for wanting to do that, but I think it's their attitude of wanting to do this. Like, man, we're going to go make money. We're going to go do this. And, no one's going to stand in our way. No matter what it takes, we're going to get what we want, what we got coming to us. Isn't that always the attitude of people nowadays? I mean, we have some of the best public assistance program, but we have people that just feel like they're entitled to that, and that's what they, if I'm not on this, why am I being kicked off? Why am I not? Now we're having a thing where they cannot buy cigarettes and alcohol on a state-assisted program. I think it's pretty obvious that you don't need that kind of stuff. It's not for those items. But it's funny that they, are now just waking up to that people have been, treating it this way, a program. It's just kind of, but the carelessness that people show in it towards money. And over in 1 Timothy 3, 2 through 5. And this is essentially Paul writing to Timothy here on the, we kind of hit upon it a little bit this morning about the qualities essentially that a bishop must have, but it also goes into showing that, bishops got to be pretty even-tempered person, same with the elders. The bishop, therefore, must be without reproach, the husband of one wife, temperate, sober-minded, orderly, given to hospitality, apt to teach, not a brawler, a straggler, but gentle, not covetousness, nor lover of money, one that rules well his own house, having children in subjection with all gravity. But if a man knows not how to rule his own house, how then shall he take care of the church of God? So essentially, that's the kind of even temperament that Paul's writing here, essentially for a business, but for a bishop. But essentially, also is getting to the love of money there. And that's one thing that they must not have. I don't know what's going on. But okay, we'll keep going. And then over a little bit further in 1 Timothy 6, 9 through 12. But they that are minded may be rich, fall into temptation and the snare, and many foolish and hurtful lusts, and such drown the men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, which some, reading after, have been led astray from the faith, and have pierced themselves through with many arrows. But thou, O man, fleeing these things, follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. Fight the good fight of the faith, and love all unto eternal life, wherein you were called, and did confess the good confession in the sight of many witnesses. So there's, here's Paul again writing to Timothy there that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. But it is kind of funny that a lot of these, you can't just lump into one category. I was trying to come up with kind of a spreadsheet of the ones that I was using and to kind of put them in categories, and they kind of go across. Why? Because essentially, the love of money is to sin and things, so, and they kind of both hold you captive. And essentially, that's what it is. And worldly lust, so you're lusting essentially after money. So again, we see how these kind of interplay with one another. It's not to kind of say there's a hard division in any of it, because there's not. But it is these kind of things are the kind of four I came up with that seem to strike me most as to what people seem to tend to have issues with nowadays. Money, I think, is still cited as one of the biggest number one reasons why people get divorced and things, just over it, not knowing what the expectations, of things are. I mean, we've had people we know that always kept separate bank accounts and things together, and it was like, well, I thought you're paying for that. Well, I thought you're paying for the mortgage. And it just totally, it's like, whoa, you somehow brought the house, and now you're just figuring this out. But this is what goes on. And I mean, and much more so that we should be more careful with what we do with our things, not only as a church, but as an individual, and what we're doing with it. Then we're going to get into worldly lusts and pleasures. Again, over now in 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 through 7. But I know this, that in the last days grievous times shall come, for men shall be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, haughty, railers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, implacable, slanderous, without self-control, fierce, no lovers of good, traitors, headstrong, puffed up, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding a form of godliness, but having denied the power of it. And from these also turn away. For the love of these that do creep into houses and take captive silly women laden with sins, and led away by diverse lusts, and ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of truth. So these kind of the whole list of things that I like how he puts it there, that drown men in destruction and perdition. And essentially, as he wrote there, it's a snare. And isn't that the thing of what it is? And I think they still do allow the foot snare trap. It's kind of like that thing once you're, kind of stuck in it. There's really no way out. It's a snare. But in all of these, we do show at the end of what the way out is. The way out is Christ. So let's not forget that. It's kind of what we're building up to. And over in James 1 through 13 through 15 reads, let no man say when he's tempted, then, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and himself tempts no man. But each man is tempted when he's drawn away by his own lust and enticed. When the lust has conceived, it bears sin, and the sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. So that's the separation from God, Again, being tempted by evil is essentially right back to the garden, being tempted by what God didn't say, being tempted by the evil one. And then he's drawn away, but then by his own lust, his own thing, like, I know what's right for me. Let's do what's right here, and it's not what God has for us. And we have a lot of this with people, nowadays, I think more so than anything. Everybody wants to be famous. Everybody wants to have their own TV show and drivel about nonsense. Isn't that sort of, what goes on so much? But that's what they're after. They're after the power and the fame. I'm going to read Acts 8:18 through 24. Read about what they call Simon the sorcerer, but it was essentially out doing cool things. But he wanted, like, when he saw what the apostles had, he's like, wow, what is that? He thought, mistaken, that he could purchase that. So Acts 18 through 24. Now when Simon saw that through the laying on the apostles' hands the Holy Spirit was given, he did and offered them money, saying, give me also this power, that on whomso I lay my hands, that I may receive the Holy Spirit. But Peter said to him, your silver perishes with you, because you have thought to obtain the gift of God with money. And thou hast neither part nor is lot in this matter, for thy heart is not right before God. Repent therefore of thy wickedness, and pray the Lord, if perhaps the thought of your heart shall be forgiven you. For I see thou art in the gall of bitterness, and in the bond of iniquity. And Simon answered and said, pray ye for me to the Lord, that none of these things which you have spoken then come upon me. What did it take for essentially that? Peter essentially called him the man of action. He essentially says to him, well, man, you've got it so far wrong, and here's why. And all your stuff that you're trying to do is going to perish with you. And you can begin to understand, like, wow, I guess I did have it wrong. So, pretty harsh words back to him. Over in Mark 8, 34 through 38. And he called to him the multitude with his disciples and said to them, if any man would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow after me. For whoso would save his life, then will lose it. And whoso shall lose his life for my sake and the gospel shall save it. For what is a profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his life? For what should a man give in exchange for his life? For whosoever shall be ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous, sinful generation, the Son of Man will then also be ashamed of him when he comes in glory of his Father with the holy angels. So it's interesting. One reason why I chose this, we had often listened to Michael Pearl and stuff, and while I think he's got some good wisdom on stuff, he's also wrong in a lot of things. And this is one that he goes to. He often says that when Jesus is talking to his disciples about them taking up the cross, that's strictly for them. And as here we read right from Mark's account that he called to himself the multitude with his disciples. So they were there with him. So there were others present. It wasn't just to the disciples. It was a call to them, a call to all of us to take it up. And again, isn't that essentially what Jesus' message was? That essentially we need to be ready to not be accounting our life as anything special, but his life was the one that is special. So how is it that we're no longer kept in captivity today? We've seen that there's nothing new. There it is. There's nothing new. There's 4 things have been around since the beginning. These are the things that essentially led the Israelites around and astray and getting into captivity. And it's been around holding them for captive for thousands of years. God has put into action then his master plan for all time to utterly lead his people from captivity. And it's then through his son's self and ultimate sacrifice. This is for all then who went back to the beginning of it, which was willingly to choose to take up the challenge and follow after his example. That example, and to follow that example, requires action. It's not just something that, again, we like to say that the prayer, something that prayer is effectual. It also required an action, just as if the Israelites with Rahab, the spies, it required an action later on in that story, an action upon their parts. So again, a lot of denominational will believe that it's just a simple thing. You do these simple couple steps, and there you go. No, it's not. So God now ultimately has his plan into effect. So are you still you've got to ask yourself, are you still being held captive? Do you feel trapped by no means of escape that's Sometimes the message that you get when you talk to people, well, there is a means of escape. God has already sent them here. He's finished that part. We need to remain faithful for him when he comes back. But for that part, being trapped, he's given us the way of escape. Then we need to also make that we are ready to be able to take the steps, just as the Israelites needed to do and essentially actively participate in the Passover. Christ is the Passover lamb, slain for us to give us life. So we have to ask, you must ask yourself, are you ready to be washed in the blood to be made clean of your sins? So if you find, talk, or ask one of us, just as the apostles of Christ spread the good news, so we are wanting to share this news with you. We are his servants and want to continue and to hold to what God has shown for us and while we wait upon his return. So if we are already servants of Christ, how about then? The challenge then for me and to you is that if you want to count yourself as a follower of Christ, how do others know it? How did Jesus know it? That's a big thing for us to be able to take away. So, there's our thing. And then I want to read in closing the last two passages from 1 Timothy 1. I think I should say 15 through 16 down here. 15 at the end. It said, this is a faithful saying and worthy of all expectation, that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am chief. Howbeit for this cause obtain mercy, that me, first Jesus, might foreshow all longsuffering for a pattern to them, which shall hereafter to believe on him of life everlasting. So essentially there's what Paul, I think, writes it so well. He often, when I take paragraphs to write, he seems to nip it in the bud in 3 words. I wonder, I love that people got to do that. Of course, he's inspired apostle, but still, I think he's definitely got that succinctness to his writing. Oftentimes, people don't see that pattern. They tend to think that Paul kind of rambles on about things. I think he's always had a method to what he was doing, and it's not for us to question. He was kind of going through, and then he brings the point right back home. And I can't tell you how many times I was talking with a fella just before I left the one site on Friday, and I said, it's often funny how much miscommunication. You hear it all the time. They got their leg cut off in an operation because nobody said, hey, wait a minute, what are we doing here? And that's the way Paul kind of goes through, and he's like, hey, wait a minute, don't forget this. Don't forget that it's through Christ, and he showed forth everything for us. And then leading then also to those naysayers of those ones from 1 Corinthians 10:13. There has been no temptation which is taking you, but such as a man can bear. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that which you are able, but will with the temptation also make a way of escape, that you might be able to endure it. So again, there's also the ultimate thing back to that person who says, well, I'm too bad, I'm too sinful, I'm too this. Or when they're tempted, God will always show you the way. And that way through Christ. So again, if you have any things, come see one of us. Or that, we have our song of invitation. So you can believe that. Thank you.